Good morning. Welcome to Citizen Extra. I am Ann Kiguta. We are following all the day's happenings for you here live with reporters across the country standing by to bring us the very latest breaking news. This morning, our eyes are on Parliament, which resumes sittings today. They, of course, have quite an entry to deal with, but we can expect even the possibility of normal sittings being suspended in order to debate President Uhuru Kenyatta's inauguration speech. So we'll be returning to Parliament very shortly for you. But as I mentioned, our reporters are across the country. This morning, Martin Munene is standing by for us live in Nyeri. And good morning, Martin. Give us a little snippet of what you're following in the county.
A very good morning to you, Anne, from Nyeri County. Chilly morning here in this county. Just one day after the swearing in of President Uhuru Kenyatta, who witnessed celebrations across this particular county, considering that a lot of people here voted in favor of President Uhuru Kenyatta. In fact, in one of the regions here, we did see people come together, have 2 bulls slaughtered and about 6 sheep, actually, so that they could be able to share and actually celebrate. They had a cake cutting ceremony and just basically just rejoice and be happy because of what was happening. And that particular center is Chaka Center, because for them it was very personal, because one of the things the president promised on his campaign trail is that he's going to actually build them a market. And so for them, they were actually excited to see the president sworn in, because for them it meant that if he's true to his word, then they should see that market come up. But also across the county, people actually celebrated what was happening. But one day later, people are moving on with their lives. Today we see I am actually at a Westwood Hotel in Nyeri County, where we expect Uwezo Kenya, an NGO, to release some findings of a survey they've conducted, they conducted rather last year, 2016, about education in the country. They were able to move across the country and sample 200 primary schools, both private and public schools, to actually just try to see the literacy level of class 4, 5, and 6 pupils in the different schools. And so they're going to be releasing these findings. But from what I have got so far is that they found out that a lot of students in class 6 and class 5 cannot be able to actually do class 4 work, and therefore it will be interesting and just find out why and maybe where exactly some of these students are actually located. But an interesting finding is that they were able to actually see, maybe backing what Fred Matiang'i, the CS for Education, said as he released the results, that gender parity has almost been achieved in the schools. And therefore, according to these results which I am holding here, the findings, we see that the number of students, girls and boys, is about the same, and generally the performance even in school is almost the same. But in some cases, especially in things like mathematics, the boys are doing better, and in things like languages, then the girls are doing better. And that is what we'll be following up for you from this county, and I bring it back to the communication center.
Thanks very much, Martin. Let's cross over now to Kisumu, where Laura Otieno is standing by for us. Good morning, Laura. What can you tell us about the county this morning on the back of President Uhuru Kenyatta's inauguration yesterday?
Well, thank you very much, Anne, and a very good morning to you from Kisumu County. And as of today, maybe if I could just give you a sneak peek of what is going on here in Kisumu town. We are at the Central Business District, where the situation is sort of going back to normalcy comparatively. If you look at yesterday, I think we have those pictures somewhere. Yesterday, there was very minimal traffic here in the CBD. Very many shops were closed. But right now, if my cameraman can pan to his right, we are seeing traders and pockets, not all of them though, but at least there is some traffic. There is some vibrant life going on here at the Kisumu Central Business District. Now, yesterday during the inauguration ceremony, we were doing a spot check around various places in town and also in Kondele, and we saw people going about their normal businesses. Well, they were telling us that their expectations are what Raila Odinga will be doing come next month, but right now they're saying that they're keen to be going back to the development agenda to see how they're going to better themselves and also the economy of the county. Now, and still in that same light, we had talked to the business community sometime last week, where they said that they were decrying losses and a rather unstable atmosphere in the business world, saying that it might take months for the sector to stabilize, but they're hoping that a favorable political climate will speed that healing process. And also we understand that the governor as well will be meeting officials of Kiwasco to be discussing matters of water provision here in the county. We'll be going to that conference later on. But in a nutshell, that is what is going down here in Kisumu. We're seeing business slowly but surely coming back to normal. Anne.
Thanks, Laura, for that report. We'll catch up with her later, and we can return you to Parliament now, where our Stephen Leto is standing by for us this morning. Good morning, Stephen. What can we expect as the House resumes its sittings?
Well, and Kiguta in studio. Indeed, you know, Parliament yesterday was supposed to resume from recess, but it was interrupted by the inauguration ceremony for Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto. But what we are expecting today is first you get the background of why the National Assembly proceeded to recess a day after they came back from another month-long recess. It is basically because the House was not properly running following the absence of the parliamentary committees. What the House was only operating with was ad hoc committee that participated in the issue of the electoral laws that were later passed and presented to the President for assent. And so the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, ordered that the House goes back on recess and gives the minority side of the House some time to go and prepare itself, consult and present the names to the Speaker of course those who will be sitting in parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committees forms the fulcrum of parliamentary business and running of parliamentary matters, following in terms of motions, bills and all that, and issues, that petitions that arise from the public and also from private members. And so this afternoon we are expecting members of the minority to have fully presented names of the members who will be seated in the parliamentary committees. Remember, they have two committees that the watchdog committee, that is the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, as well as the Parliamentary Investment Committee, that a member of the opposition should chair, the members of the minority side should chair, because it is a watchdog committee that oversees executive expenditure and government operations. And so that is why it is crucial for all those committees to be in place. But of course you can see a lot of work going forward in terms of after the presentation of the names, then we are also going to have the chairmanship, the election of the chairmanship of those parliamentary committees and all that. But most importantly today, the top of the agenda is this, the formation of the selection committee, or the committee on appointments. That committee, and is the ones that will vet President Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet, that will be presented as the cabinet nominees to the House for vetting. But again, another clash is looming, because members of the National Super Alliance have ordered its members not to participate in vetting President Uhuru Kenyatta's nominees as a protest, and what they're terming as they are not recognizing that the presidency that was inaugurated yesterday. But again, they are going ahead to form other committees that they have not been told, you know, to keep off its sittings or to keep off its operations. And it is interesting to see how that will unfold today, as well as also the formation of the House leadership for the minority side. We have been able to get a sneak preview of what the National Super Alliance was having until 2 days ago, when they sat and, you know, agreed on the names that could be presented to the House this afternoon. Of course, we know John Mbadi, the Member of Parliament for Suba South, is going to retain his, is going to have his seat as the minority leader in the National Assembly. We are also being told that Robert Mbui, the Member Member of Parliament for Kathiani is going to sit as the Deputy Minority Leader of the opposition, and of course, and that is subject to confirmation on whether those are the names that will be presented to the Speaker of the National Assembly this afternoon. And it is a busy day for the National Assembly. It has already kicked off its sittings this morning at 9:30, where they are looking into some motions and some bills that are still pending in the House, before now spilling over to the afternoon, where they will be going into the core business of the day, that is formation of those committees, particularly the selection committee, as well as members of the IALA that are supposed to be presented to the East African Legislative Assembly for the Arusha Assembly to kick off its sitting. And so on, later on, of course, we'll be able to interact with the House leadership, Aden Duale, as well as the House leadership on the minority side, that is John Badi, to see what they will be, they will tell us going forward, and what is the interest for both sides of the House going forward. For now, Anne, it's back to you.
Thank you, Stephen, for that report. And very shortly, we're going to be getting into our discussion this morning in studio as we recap the events of yesterday, the inauguration of President Uhuru Kenyatta. And in his swearing-in speech, President Kenyatta promised an inclusive government, but the president warned his rivals against mounting unconstitutional challenges against his regime in an apparent reference to the opposition coalition's vows not to recognize his authority. Francis Gashuri reports.
Even as President Uhuru Kenyatta's bumpy and controversial ride back to State House was affirmed by the Supreme Court and sealed through the swearing-in festivities at the Kasarani Stadium, it is not lost on the incumbent that he had a part just begun, uniting Kenyans and healing a nation that has been divided along political and ethnic lines after the August presidential poll, whose outcome was invalidated by the Supreme Court, and the subsequent fresh contest that was boycotted by NASA leader Raila Odinga.
It was a contest between two competing visions. I believe that those who voted for me chose the better vision. I undertake today to be the custodian of the dreams of all and to be the keeper of the aspirations of those who voted for me and those who did not. I will be president of all.
And all of us, as the people of Kenya, must stand together to say no to hate, to resist ethnicity, to refuse division, and to reject violence.
NASA does not recognize his presidency and has demanded a fresh State House contest preceded by radical electoral reforms.
Today is the 123rd day since we began on August 8th. Today's inauguration therefore marks the end, and I repeat, the end of our electoral process.
Kenyatta prioritizing national unity as he begins his second and last term.
I have begun reaching out to all leaders across the political divide, restating my commitment and expressing my willingness to work with them to achieve this objective of nationhood.
We know very well that there cannot be meaningful development and stability and prosperity if there is no peace. There cannot be peace if there is no justice. And there cannot be justice without the rule of law and the respect of our Constitution. All of us are summoned to work together in that direction.
The president acknowledging the country's political fragmentation, institutional and governance challenges, as well as the feeling of exclusion among supporters of his rivals.
However serious our grievances may be, the law must reign supreme.
His first term in office was marred with allegations of grand corruption and wastage of public resources, a malady he seeks to cure in his second State House stint.
I want today to put the public service on notice. It is not going to be business as usual. I will not allow faceless bureaucrats and functionaries to deny the public the quality of service they deserve from their government.
Kenyatta reaching out to the judiciary in smoothing the path of development and service delivery.
We will engage with the judiciary to address the protracted delays in our justice system and the use of our courts.
With his legacy at stake, Kenyatta's focus areas in the second term include spurring economic growth, job creation through industrialization, and attracting investment and revitalizing the health and housing sectors. The president also fashioning himself as a Pan-Africanist.
I am directing that any African wishing to visit Kenya will be eligible to receive a visa at the port of entry. Our brothers and sisters in the East African community, from today, you will be treated like Kenyans. Like your Kenyan brothers and sisters, you will only need your identity card. You can now work, do business, own property, farm, and if you wish and find a willing partner, you can marry and settle in Kenya.
If clinching a second term in office was a Herculean task for President Uhuru Kenyatta, then an even bigger challenge awaits him, that of uniting a country fractured by vicious political competition throughout the year. He also has to fulfill the many promises he has made to the Kenyan population, even as he works on his legacy with the exit beckoning in 2022. Francis Gashuri, Citizen TV, Kasarani Stadium, Nairobi.
And in studio with me is Joy Mudivo. She is an advocate of the High Court and a political analyst. Next to her is Javas Bigambo. He is a governance expert. And next to him is Lillian Mahiri-Zaja. You may remember as a former IEBC vice chair, but of course is a lawyer. And you're all welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me start with you, Joy. Your thoughts on the president's speech?
One thing that stood out for me was the fact that he not only had what we were expecting, the inclusivity and the whatnot, he had also had a very Pan-African message. And that for me was actually a bit of a shock. I was like, okay, so why are we really going in this direction? Where he said, you know what, Kenya now is open to the rest of Africa. We're your brothers, we're your sisters. Come and live here, come and work here. East Africans, you're as good as Kenyans. All you need is your ID. You don't need work permits. And then also extend it to the rest of Africans, saying, you know what, you can get a visa on arrival. There's no preconditions. And especially given the diplomatic row we've had with South Africa, that was something I was like, do we really want to go down that route? But it was very categorical. It won't be on the basis of reciprocity. We are going to have this as our policy. Kenya is open to Africa. And that message to me gave me an indication that in his second term, he won't just be looking towards Kenya. In terms of legacy, he's looking at posturing himself as a Pan-Africanist. That is something that's very interesting to see. You see that mirrored with what Netanyahu also said in State House when he said, you know what, the world is looking at Africa and want to come here and we're seeing potential here. So you can tell that there's a conversation going on around that. And so for me, that was what stood out from yesterday's speech that I found a bit interesting, and would be good to see how it develops in his second term. How exactly does he want to be not just a Kenyan statesman, but an Pan-Africanist?
All right, that's interesting, and we can talk more about that when it comes to legacy, but in his legacy, but when it comes to Kenyan issues, what did you think?
I was very disappointed when we were talking about, he was talking about some of the local issues, but he was looking more like wanting to brush over what's been going on. Yesterday was a good opportunity for us to hit at the issues that are clouding us right now. But the problem with that sort of speech was it had to be like an acceptance speech, it had to be like an inauguration speech, it had to be a reconciliation speech, it had to be very many things into one. But for me, I was a little bit disappointed because there were some things I really hoped he would address head on. For example, when you're talking about inclusivity, one of the biggest ways we see inclusivity right now in Kenya is through the strengthening of devolution. When you make up a passing remark about it, then somebody does not really understand that, you know what, we are all included, and let us really use the counties as the places to be included. But at the end of the day, I thought he tried to come out forcefully especially in terms of I am now in charge. I repeat that the election season is now over. For me, that was a coded message. Say, you know what? We have been operating now as competitors, but now I am commander-in-chief, and you can expect me to behave as somebody who is in charge. So on that score, I think he tried to come up very powerfully. And I must give him credit, because with what we have gone through this year, the level of restraint he has shown, even yesterday, coming out a bit muted, may have been part of that strategy, to remain on an even keel, to look like, you know what, I'm not an overreacting president. I will try and be tempered, even with all the drama that was going on outside Kasarani yesterday.
All right, Javas.
Well, and from the times of Plato, Aristotle to Cicero, the finest orators that the world has ever had, we know very well that political speech making is a very important tool. One, to unite a people, to speak and touch on collective aspirations, and also to articulate the vision of a leader to a nation, to appeal to their yearnings, and also demonstrate that you're a leader that is towering in imagination, thought, etc. Yesterday, in that second inaugural address of the president, it was yet again another demonstration of that greater effort. Yes, I appreciate that there was the conscientiousness on the part of the president on what is it that he should speak to authoritatively, and that which maybe he should tactfully handle. And you could see the deployment of various tactful rhetorical devices in his speech. Much as some of them, there were a bit of limitations to the extent that they were used. Now, having listened word for word that whole speech, close to 3,737 words spoken.
You can't.
Wow.
Yes. You realize that far too many people, locally and internationally, were following and listening to the president, even the members of the opposition. And there are a number of things that, to me, I would point out. One, the president spoke to the closure of the entire electoral period. Yes, with that inauguration, the electoral cycle turned a full circle. And that was nearly about it. But we know very well that various critical issues are still hanging like clouds over our heads. We know very well that there are hangovers over legitimate discontent on policy, administrative issues, etc. There are members of the other political divide or persuasion that still have not bought into his presidency. And we've heard even, for example, Senator Orengo saying that they're not recognizing President Kenyatta's leadership or authority as president of the republic. But we know very well that that is just rejecting the truth, because truth is that we have got a legitimate president in office. But there are political winds that must actually be contained. Otherwise, we are finding ourselves in a whirlwind of politics.
And was the speech the place to do that?
It was actually a very fine opportunity to start off the conversation of healing a nation. Remember too, that with a well-crafted speech, you would appeal to every imagination. And remember that my fellow countrymen and women were looking up to the president and will always look up to him, because even the constitution bestows upon him that power of being a national unifier. But there are a number of things that were falling apart. For example, a line in his speech when he says that the people who voted for him chose the better vision. This was not a time for chest thumping. Actually, this was a time to demonstrate colorful magnanimity in his leadership, in his win. And that's why I see the flaws in his speech.
How much of this is an issue with, to what extent do you take issue with speechwriters? Obviously, you can imagine that there is a team sitting in State House that knows about policy, etc., and politics, and should be able to blend the two. Do you think it is a failure on that part? There was,
a failure on the part of his speechwriters. You see, the person in the stage of president, what you need to do is to speak to your team, articulate your vision, mission, and aspirations. Then these are the weavers, the craftsmanship comes to the speechwriters, and it's up to them to play around with the words that touch on emotions and imagination of the collective. Now, from the beginning of the speech, you would see the president getting a bit preachy. It's actually the second paragraph, when he's appealing or speaking to matters of the prophet Isaiah in scripture and going down. And it was all good because all of us are connected on the ideals of God and religion, etc., even our constitution. However, when it comes to the aspect of appealing to the collective assent of a nation, there was a bit of failure there, because the element of collectivity, or those things that we agree on, all of us as a nation, those ideals that seem to have been lost through this election, is where now the speechwriters
could have expounded on,
and they failed on that.
Okay, all right. Lillian, your thoughts on the speech?
Yeah, I think the president tried to be on the conciliatory side, although of course there were gaps that I would admit can be seen through that speech, but he tried to speak in a conciliatory tone, that he was going to be the custodian of our dreams, our aspirations, those who voted for him, those who did not. He was just trying to look like he is going to accommodate each and every Kenyan, and even going out to thank all the voters for having come out to vote for him. And of course, even looking at the journey he has traveled, speaking about the ICC, coming up to where we are now, and even appreciating the institutions, in fact, appreciating IEBC for having managed the electoral process, appreciating the Supreme Court in particular for having, come this far, and very positive that God has brought us this far and he is going to take us further. So I think in that sense, he was trying to generally bring in a sense of nationhood, patriotism around this very sensitive matter of the electoral process. And in terms of looking at the continent, I would agree he was trying to be a Pan-Africanist at that, and more so looking at our neighbors, our immediate neighbors, and inviting them, on a platform where we can engage as equal partners, as brothers and sisters, in the spirit of the EAC community. And of course, that would touch on expounding and, building our bridges in terms of the trade and all the aspirations we have for the East African community. So I think there he touched a little bit on what we expected of the president to say. And in particular on the electoral process, he was so emphatic, and he said, I repeat, this is the end of the electoral process. Why did he bring this out? If you recall, after the 26th election, rather before that, the Supreme Court ruling, one of the issues for determination was whether we are still in the electoral cycle or whether the electoral cycle had come to an end. And this is an issue that we have to grapple with, because the law, or rather the constitution, is not express on this issue, that once we have invalidated an election under Article 140 and gone for a fresh election under 143, what happens? We do not know that. In fact, we are still awaiting the full ruling of the Supreme Court to know exactly what they would say on that particular aspect. So it was good to hear the president say, with that sense of finality, that here we are, the electoral process has come to an end, and we need to look forward to build the country. So I think in that sense, when he said all the issues he brought forward, he's been criticized. I've seen some comments that he's sounding rhetoric in terms of the development agenda, the policies of Jubilee. But I think it's sort of an emphasis of where he wants to take the country, and that, of course, will form part of his legacy. So looking generally at what is contained in the speech, we would say there are gaps there. There are those who say, why did he not speak to all the deaths that occurred during the whole entire process? Remember, it's a political game. Voters have been put on a scale where we've had, for once in Kenya, to choose whether you are a Jubilee, where people say you are a jubilant, or umenaswa, you are in NASA. So we have had these divisions in the country, which are very, very divisive, and the country has been so polarized. And it's important that any leader speaking now has to be very cautious in the sense that you could easily break this fragile national unity that we are trying to chase and has been elusive for quite some time. So I think he would not have pleased everybody, but he sounded, if I may say, he tried his best to sound as conciliatory as he could.
All right, thanks for those views, and we'll get to what the NASA leader had to say a little later. But first, let's take you to Parliament and listen in on their sittings as the House resumes debate.
At the initial phase, you look at Thika Road, you look at, I thought Thika Road was the heaven, Mr. Speaker. I was shocked recently when I was going through it. The traffic jam is crazy, Mr. Speaker. So this goes back to planning. And it says failing to plan, Mr. Speaker, is planning to fail. And I want to quote the wonderful word of Abraham Lincoln, the former president of the United States. He said, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today." So whatever we are doing today, Mr. Speaker, we must think about it tomorrow. And indeed, Honorable Meli's motion has come because of the poor planning, particularly at that particular time. It is a nightmare to pass in this city, Mr. Speaker. And when you look at this motion, it would also be nice if it's cascaded down to the counties, because we know roads is something which is devolved, Mr. Speaker, and we've seen many other bodies which are now under the county. It would be a great responsibility for the governors, Mr. Speaker, to also look at the spirit of this motion so that it can also be done at the county level, so that this issue, when it comes to the planning phase, Mr. Speaker, we can as well have it planned so that we do not have these issues. Mr. Speaker, the other day I was in Westlands on traffic jam. Then an ambulance had to put on a siren, Mr. Speaker, only to realize it was doing that to avoid the traffic jam. There was nothing of emergency with that ambulance, Mr. Speaker. And this goes to the discipline. It is also a disciplinary case, Mr. Speaker. Because when we try to, of course I had to follow it so that I can also reach quickly, Mr. Speaker. But only to realize inside there, we didn't see any critical condition for a patient, Mr. Speaker. So the much problem here, Mr. Speaker, is also to do with the discipline. The other day, Mr. Speaker, when I had gone to the airport to welcome Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, who is coming from the US, it was very terrific, Mr. Speaker, when we went to welcome Baba. It was a big convoy, Mr. Speaker, and we realized this Mombasa Road, we thought it was designed very well, only to realize it was a big problem. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a wonderful motion, but the challenge of implementing is a big issue. Maybe at a later stage, you need to put a task force in place to be able to understand. We've seen the bypass has really helped, Mr. Speaker. Actually, bypass is a wonderful idea. If today you're coming from the airport and you want to go to the sites of Runda, Westlands, you can just use the southern bypass. It's a wonderful idea where we're having the flyovers. For example, when you're going to the airport, we thank God with these bypasses which are there. But now this motion for Honorable Meli, it's a wonderful idea, Honorable Meli, but my worry, my concern is the practical aspect when it comes to implementation. Because we can't pass a motion which when it comes to implementation, it's impossible. That's my only worry. But the idea is a wonderful idea. We have problems of traffic jams in this country. We've seen property being lost of fire because those fire engines cannot move. We've seen issues of the police when it comes to criminal cases, you know. But the issue is also to do with that people must get disciplined when you go to many other big cities. Not that there's that delay of traffic, but that traffic flow that is going on. But in this country, I think we should also emphasize on the aspect of discipline, Mr. Speaker. I don't have much to say, but as we pass this motion, my worry it comes to the issue of implementation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I report.
Very well. And is that member sitting next to you?
And there you have it. Parliament back in its sittings, and that was Chris Wamalo. Of course, he is from the NASA camp. So interesting to see NASA not just back in the House, but back in the House and debating. Obviously, when they went on recess, it was the fact that, as we heard from Leto earlier, that the opposition, if you like, was not engaged, and that these House committees must be constituted in a specific way. Is that a surprise to you, Joy, or is it also in a roundabout way an admission that, you know, as far as the Constitution is concerned, that electoral process has ended?
And you know something, I'm very, very glad that they're back in Parliament. Whether or not they're going under protest or they're going half-heartedly, as long as they're back, because that is the room that they occupy. And I think it was on the show on Monday when I said I find it irresponsible when elected members of parliament refuse to take up a position that only they can take up and do things that only they can do. For example, the example that I used on Monday is if you say you will not participate, for example, in the vetting of the cabinet secretaries, and then using tyranny, people go ahead and they pass all the nominees, and then later you come and say, oh, there was no balance, there was no gender. Where were you? And you are the ones who are supposed to do this. So looking at the floor of the House right now and seeing the participation of the NASA affiliated MPs for me is a win, because the people who sent them there are counting on them to make their voice heard on the floor of the House. And secondly, like you said, House business committees need to be constituted. There are some that must be led by the opposition, for example, the public accounts one. And so if they are not participating, there are some things, for example, even something as simple as managing the budget and looking at the audit reports and making sure that government spending is in check will not be done. And then now later we come and say, oh, maybe those wanton spending or those things that are not being, procedures are not being followed.
Yeah.
So if you're the one who can, if you're the only Kenyan who can occupy that space, occupy it and do what the Kenyans have sent you to do. And I'm glad that now they are alive to that fact that, you know what, we are here to do a job. And like you said, it's also an admission on their part that, look, we've gotten to a sort of an end. And now the only way, you know, once you hit rock bottom, the only way now is start coming back up. And the only way to come back up is not to ensure that the things that even NASA is clamoring for, they have the space to pay attention. For example, if you're talking about electoral reforms, if there are some laws that need to be changed, if there are some things that need to be amended, this is the time and the place to do it within the next 5 years. If there's also developmental agenda you want to look at, if there's places where you want greater accountability, this is a space within which to do it. And I'm glad that Parliament has hit the ground running. And we were thinking of going to discuss the debate, but from what we hear, there's actually a motion on the floor of the House. They're actually going on with House business. And for me, that's a big win, because we've been in limbo for so long. These guys were elected in August. It's going to December, and we've not seen anything concrete coming out of our parliament. So I am very encouraged, and kudos to them.
Right. Javas, let me ask you this. Will, you know, obviously the opposition has, and yesterday we heard the NASA leader Raila Odinga saying that he will be sworn in on the 12th of December, and part of the reasoning that that side of the coalition is giving is that, you know, still the people, we the people, you know, and that power rests with the people, and using that and people's assemblies as a mechanism to find some sort of legitimacy, or others would say justification, within or around the constitution. But the reality is that there is an administration that has been sworn in by the President of the Supreme Court, which adds even that much more legitimacy to, you know, the inauguration that happened yesterday. And so one can expect Jubilee to argue that if we're going to talk and we're going to, you know, battle on issues, it will have to be through certain institutions, for instance, Parliament. So is it in your mind that NASA will have to use both approaches, the People's Assembly that perhaps appeals very much to its core base, but at the same time have to return to Parliament and pursue that angle aggressively if they're actually going to be able to engage the state in a way that the state recognizes as legitimate?
You see, Anne, when the NASA leader speaks on matters sovereignty of the people, he is referring to a section, actually the first article of the Constitution. And that means that he appreciates the rule of law. If he appreciates the rule of law, then why does he want to depart from the same rule of law if he wants to have himself sworn into office on the 12th of December? It's a departure from that rule of law. It is not good for him, especially with his political stature, to speak from two sides of his mouth. One, appealing to the rule of law, and then the other moment departing from it. It would be very important for that example to be used in practice, that actually, even though he's got various differences with the present political establishment and administration of Uhuru Kenyatta, even though he legitimately is discontented with the outcome of the election, but that actually he appreciates the place of the Constitution and constitutionalism. And to that extent, it will be only wise that, and actually even on the part of the Jubilee administration, that they will be only willing to engage in any necessary process of negotiation upon the part of NASA appreciating that there is an administration in place. Failure to have that appreciation, then there will be actually no room for that kind of discussion. Secondly, if it's a question of reforms that NASA is pushing for, whether electoral, etc., they are still speaking to another election, which is actually impossible at the moment. Then even that election will have to be provided for in law. So the place of law here is sacrosanct. Remember too that the rule of law has got a sacred place in Article 10 of the Constitution as one of the values of our nation. We need to have our leaders know that the place of values of our nation is a tradition, is a custom that we need to nurture, not only for the present generation, but even for generations yet unborn.
But politically speaking, and I hear you in terms of the Constitution, but politically, especially coming on the back of having not taken part in this election, which some say might have been a miscalculation, you can expect him to want to regain ground or to keep his supporters appeased in some way, or to keep the momentum going. They do need to continue to have some sort of increased relevance in public light post an inauguration. They're competing with an inauguration, and that's why I'm asking whether it's then, despite the legal matters, it is still important for them to pursue any people power kind of mechanism.
It is undebatable that the withdrawal from the race was a miscalculation. And the same thing happened to Morgan Tsvangirai in 2008 in Zimbabwe. Miscalculations must also be appreciated. But now that is water under the bridge. And the reality is that there will be electoral fatigue by the voters and even some of the supporters of NASA, because we cannot be in a perpetual electoral process and campaigns forever. I know that still the closure over this election is yet to come, especially looking at it through political lenses. And that is where the wisdom and leadership of President Kenyatta would have to come in. There are difficult choices that will have to be made by President Kenyatta. There are difficult choices that will have to be made by Honorable Raila Odinga. If I were to refer, for example, to a statement made by George W. Bush on 20th January 2005 during his second inaugural address, he said, and I quote, that the difficulty of a task is no excuse for avoiding it. End of quote. So here, the fact that there are difficult issues facing this country from the side of the opposition leader Raila Odinga or from the part of the president, there must be no excuse, political or otherwise, from facing those tasks.
That is that's such an incredible statement, and I literally just got some goosebumps. So we're going to return to that. And what are the difficult tasks and how do you address them? Is it a quasi-legal process? Is it purely a political one now that there is a president in office proper? We want to cross over to Kisumu briefly now and just bring you some of the other stories that are developing now. And the governor, Anyang' Nyong'o, is opening water stakeholder conference. Let's listen in.
Who is a great expert in water resources. Any questions? Yes, my dear.
Some time back we had an outbreak of cholera and dysentery. And just like you said, there are some households still do not have access to clean water. Maybe is this going to come up so that you can address the issue of Kisumu?
That will definitely come up. I just mentioned it. But another thing we must discuss. This is why I was talking about waste. To what extent can we continue to use pit latrines in the county and also encourage the digging of boreholes for fresh water? There's a contradiction somewhere there, because if you dig a borehole downstream and you put a latrine upstream, the likelihood is that will be contamination between the latrine and the borehole, and the consequence is cholera. And so we must think very hard in this county how we introduce water closets in every household, on how we progressively reduce the use of pit latrines across the country to prevent waterborne diseases or what pit latrines can do in terms of destroying our health. Yes.
In Sondu Miriu, I'm aware that apart from generating electricity, there is a development that will be able to get to 200 acres. If that channel is developed fully, is there hope that we can find some partners soon to have it developed fully?
The original,
how much will it take in terms of
the original package for Sondu Miriu was that it was also going to be used for irrigation. How that was not done, I still have to find out. But it is still a potential we must use. One of the reasons why we have this conference too is to look at those kind of issues and cost them. We have experts here who should help us cost the use of Sondu Miriu for irrigation. How much will it cost us? Once we know what the cost is, then we can look for resources. There are really many ways of getting those resources. You can have a soft loan, all kinds of things. Those then are the practicalities that we are looking to once we know what the cost is. Yeah.
This is my concern. There are regime, not some drilling machines that are still lying there in the country offices there. Have they been put into use to cut this issue of clean water?
You are right, they are still lying there. I also see them lying there. But one of the things we must do is not let them continue lying there. We have to make use of them. And one of the, you see, one of the things you have to do before you use a ridge to dig for water is to do a geophysical survey to know exactly where there's high potential for getting the water. Now, we have first of all do a geophysical survey of our county and map out water track. It's called water tracking. We must water track our county. It's ongoing. It's ongoing. And usually what people do, you see a rig and you're so excited, you go to a village and you begin digging. You don't find water, you have spent a lot of money. So we are currently water tracking, do a geophysical survey of our county, so that when we begin sinking boreholes, we are very accurate what we do. Okay? We don't waste time doing trial and error. We want to be scientific about it. It is good we have the rigs, and they may not be enough. Now, once we know the potentialities of digging boreholes and many we can do, then we can know how many rigs we can mobilize to do that, and within what time we shall cover the whole county with necessary boreholes. But then, you don't dig boreholes where you can have water diverted from a river, surface water, and used for potable water. Those are the kind of studies we need to do. A combination between using a big reservoir in Kajulu or in Maragoli Hills, and then using that water downstream for potable water, and where you don't have enough, that kind of thing, then we use boreholes. That's the kind of thing I would like to come out of this meeting.
Prof, there was a project which was started by the national government by damming the river Nyando upstream. I don't know whether it has died or the use was to irrigate the downstream when there's no water.
That's one of the things I'd like us to discuss here. The national government started many things, if I remember well, in terms of using water resources. One of them is Galana. You know the story of Galana. So we're not lying to hang on to national government projects which don't work, but we would like to see those possibilities and then put them to work so that they benefit the county. Mind you, water is now a county function. So whatever the national government started which is not working, we must take them over and make them work, because it is now our function now. We don't want to go back and looking for the national government which left them to us. We want to see what we do with it. Now, there's also in the Intergovernmental Relations Act possibilities that if you want the national government to come and help a county government, they're obligated to do so. That is provided in law. So if you find that they started something and they did not fully invest in it when they should, it is our right to appeal to national government under Intergovernmental Relations Act for them now to come in partnership with us and finish what they started to do.
Can we have the last two?
Yeah.
On pollution, there's been a major concern that the industries,
And we're taking a short break on Citizen Extra. We're back with more after this.